respected senior faculty members, faculty members at DAIC, I'll be discussing about the basic investigations which you have to do in a child with short stature. So, as discussed earlier, we should see that which are the children who requires investigation. So, when all children with short stature, as already mentioned by Dr. Riyaz sir, don't require any investigation. Usually, 50 to 60% of them will be a physiological causes of short stature, like a familial short stature or a constitutional delay of short stature. Thus, among the rest, 30 to 40%, again, there will be other causes of short stature, like chronic systemic illnesses or malnutrition. All this may be the cause for short stature in the rest. The growth hormone deficiency usually causes short stature in children. Less than 5% of the children who are referred to us with short stature. So, when to evaluate? That is, any child who presents as a short stature with less than who is less than the height is less than the third centile, as discussed previously. The child is shorter, significantly shorter than the mid-parental centile. We plot the mid-parental centile and see we see the target height range, and if the child is significantly shorter than that range, then the child needs evaluation. Or if the child has a growth velocity less than 5 centimeters, that is 4 or less centimeter per year. So the growth velocity should be ideally evaluated over a period of minimum of 6 months and ideally for a period of 1 year. So the growth of the child is less than that, 4 or less per year, the child needs evaluation. In some conditions, like familial short stature and all, if the parents are short, the child is within the mid-parental centile, you may need just a bone age for confirming that it is a familial short stature. You don't need to do all this required investigation. But if the child has any of the problems like short stature, short for the mid-parental centile, or a poor growth velocity over a period of 1 year, the child definitely requires investigation. So for our first aim is to rule out all the systemic conditions because that is in fact the more common cause of short stature. The first line investigations include a complete blood count, ESR, a peripheral smear, especially for the evaluation of anemia, a urine routine to rule out any infections, and a urine pH sometimes is taken. Then you have to rule out systemic illness as like a chronic renal disease, chronic liver disease, or a chronic heart disease, or any other chronic illness should be ruled out. For this, so you have to take a basic renal function test, blood urea creatinine, electrolytes should be taken. Calcium and phosphorus is also another important investigation. So it's important you do the phosphorus also whenever you evaluate for the calcium. Isolated calcium levels doesn't have much importance. Then a thyroid function test and a routine blood sugar levels should be taken. And an X-ray of the left hand in the AP view should be taken for bone age. Bone age is a very important investigation, as you must have heard in the previous lectures, especially in the evaluation of a short stature. And other investigations as clinically indicated, like suppose the child has a history of chronic diarrhea or a fat malabsorption, the stool should be examined for any parasites or any fat globules, something like that. Then if the child has a clinical examination is suggestive or has a positive contact history, the child should be, the Mantoux test should be done, or CB-NAT as required should be done. So these are the initial first line investigations which should be done for all children who needs to be investigated for short stature. So I'll be telling about the how to assess the bone age of the child. So how do you assess the bone age? So bone age is assessed by comparing the degree of maturation of various epiphyses in the X-ray of the hand with the related standard. So we generally compare the X-ray of the X-ray of the left hand is taken. So it's important to write the X-ray as X-ray of left hand. Never write as X-ray of the wrist, because we need not only the wrist but the whole hand for evaluation of the bone age. So that X-ray is compared to the standard X-rays of different age groups so as to calculate the bone age. Assessing the bone age by assessing the carpal bones is a very crude method, and this should not be carpal bones assessment should not be used for assessing the bone age. what is the importance of bone age? So bone age has a diagnostic role, prognostic role, and in specific condition, X-ray of the left hand will help to diagnose some conditions. So if there is a, normally there can, the X-ray, if the bone age is severely delayed, like more than 3 years of 3 years, like if the age of the child is 8 years and you get a bone age of 4 years or 5 years, then it is a severe delay. So we have to rule out endocrine etiology like hypothyroidism or a growth hormone deficiency. Mild delay, like around 2 to 3 years of age, will be there in, as mentioned earlier, there will be, it can be a constitutional delay of growth and puberty. It can be delayed in systemic diseases as well as nutritional causes. So any severe delay in bone age you have to always think of endocrine causes. Then bone age can be normal in conditions like some syndromes, especially Turner syndrome and other genetic conditions. It can be normal. Skeletal dysplasias, you can get sometimes a normal or even an advanced bone age. Then small for gestation SGA babies also with poor catch-up, sometimes the bone age can be normal. So we had to see whether what is the degree of delay of bone age. Then assessment of the bone age will also help to predict the adult height. So we have to use another charts, not only the bone age charts, we have to use another charts also for prediction of the adult height. Then other conditions like Turner syndrome, pseudohypoparathyroidism, as mentioned by Riaz sir, by just taking the X-ray and looking at the 4th and 5th metacarpals, they may be short. So we are taking X-ray for some reason, and we can sometimes see that there's a short metacarpal sitting over there. So it may give a clue to the diagnosis. So which X-ray? As I already mentioned, X-ray of the non-dominant hand. So usually it is the left hand which is taken. It should not be the wrist. And for all age groups, right from 6 months to 18 years, we can use the X-ray of the hand. Previously, the teaching was that we should use the shoulder X-ray or the elbow X-ray for various age groups. So that is not required nowadays. We have Atlas for up to 18 years of age for both girls as well as boys. And one thing you should remember then that in children less than 3 years, the bone age may not be that reliable. You can have a wide variance in the bone age, variability in the bone age. So it may not be that reliable, but if it is too delayed, again, we should consider that it is a delayed bone age. But we should have some caution in interpreting in children less than 3 years. So we had to remember that skeletal maturation progresses from the proximal to the distal fashion, whereas fusion occurs in the distal to proximal. I'll make it clear that initially the initial epiphyses to appear are in the proximal bones like radius and ulna. So you can see the radial epiphysis which appears at around 1.5 to 2 years. And after that, the epiphyses of the metacarpals appear, and followed by appearance of the epiphysis of the phalanges appears. So slowly you can see that slowly they are appearing like this. And this is a bone age of a child at 4 years of age. At 7 years, you can see the other distal epiphyses are slowly appearing, increasing in size. Initially, these are rounded in shape. Later, they become a cup-shaped structures. And usually by 7 years, 5 to 6 years, the ulnar epiphysis will appear. So appearance occurs from the proximal to the distal fashion. So as the child matures more and more, the fusion of this epiphysis occurs with the metaphysis. So fusion occurs from distal. So initially the fusion of the distal phalanges occur, then proximal, middle, and then proximal, and then the metacarpal heads, fusion of these metacarpal heads, and finally it will be by 18 years there occurs fusion of the radius and fusion of the epiphysis of the radius of ulna with the metaphysis. So that is why fusion maturation occurs proximally to distal, whereas fusion occurs from distal to the proximal fashion. So again, this is a bone age of a child with 14 years. You can see that almost you can see that the epiphyses are as long as the metaphysis. Initially they'll be short, then they'll become slightly as big as this, then they'll start cupping, and then they will start fusing. So slow fusion occurs by actually 14 years of age. So this is a table which shows the appearance of various epiphyses. So the distal radius, in general, you should remember that girls, the bone age is slightly advanced compared to the boys. So the distal radius around 1.5 years, around 15 months in girls and 1.5 years in boys. Metacarpal heads usually by 1 to 3 years in both sexes. Initially, by 6 to 8 months, you can have the capitate and hamate bones. And the third carpal bones, that is the triquetral bone, appears by 2 years of age in girls, and boys 2.5 years. The distal ulna is a very important landmark. You should always look for this. In girls, it appears by 5 years and boys by 6 years. Then the pisiform bone, which is the last carpal bone to appear, that appears by 9 years in girls and 10 years in boys. And sesamoid bone of abductor pollicis longus, that appears by 11 years and 12 years. So I'll just show that. So this is the pisiform bone, usually appears by 9 years in girls and 10 years in boys. And here you can get a sesamoid bone like this. Usually, so this appears by 11 years in boys and 11 years in girls and 10 years in boys. So these are the, roughly you can make a visual assessment of these things, and then add accurate calculation of the bone age is definitely by comparing with the standard methods. That is, the estimation of the bone age is by the long used method, that is the Grulich and Pyle method, or by the Tanner-Whitehouse techniques. So in the Grulich and Pyle method, there are X-rays from various age groups in both males and females up to 18 years, and you can compare the child's X-ray with the standard atlas of these X-rays, and which is the closest X-ray, which is near to the patient's X-ray, will be taken as the bone age of the child. So you have to compare one age below, one age above, and then slowly you have to see all these things have to be seen. That is the metaphyseal. All this carpal bones are the least things to be seen. Other things like the metacarpal heads, epiphysis of the phalanges, the fusion, the degree of fusion, everything has to be seen, which is the most appropriate X-ray, and then the bone age is calculated. So the Grulich and Pyle method is very useful, inexpensive and reliable. It also helps to decide the growth potential of the child. I'll be coming to the Tanner-Whitehouse method. So this is a child which we have to assess the bone age. This is a male child with chronological age of 8 years. So initially, but suppose the child has a height age of 3 years only, then you start using the standard X-ray for 3 years of age. So this is an X-ray of the bone. You can see that this is much more advanced compared to a child. You can see the epiphyses, they are bigger. See this small epiphyses of the phalanges. Again, these X-rays are much more advanced than 3 years. So you go to the next year. That is, this is a 4 years of age. Again, compare these two X-rays. You just see the metacarpal of the first metacarpal and this one. So this is much advanced than this one. And also you can see that there is ulnar epiphysis has appeared. So this child must be, since it is a male, it must be around 6 years of age. And you can see it's not nowhere near 4 years. Again, compare with the 5-year-old child. Again, you can see that this bone is much more advanced. All these things have to be seen. See, this is still a rounded metaphysis, but here we have almost like a cap-like metaphysis. So again, this is much more advanced than a 5-year-old child. Then you have to go to compare to the next X-ray. So the standard atlases are available with us in case of a Grulich-Pyle method. If anybody wants these atlases, they can contact us, and even the mobile version is available. Not for the Grulich and Pyle method. But another chart is available, which is a mobile application which will help us to calculate the bone age. So that we can provide to all DAC. Then it's the Tanner-Whitehouse method. This is a much more better method than the Grulich and Pyle charts. So in this method, we assess 13 bones are taken. The epiphysis of 13 bones are taken so as to assess the bone age. So it has been prepared from British, Belgian, Italian, US, and Japanese children. So since Japanese children are also involved in this, it may be more. And Asian population is also involved in the calculation of this method. So our TW3 may be more useful to us than the Grulich and Pyle method. Carpal bones are not taken, and TW3 is available. It is available in the Play Store, but it's a paid app. So we can provide this app to everybody if anybody needs this application. So this has an accuracy of plus or minus 1 month. This is the TW3 app which is available. You can change this to right side to make it a male. So male or a female. then you press on the score bone age button. So you can, for all these 13 bones, we have the standard from it is scored from A to I or A to H. So radius A is absence of metaphysis. Here I have clicked on E. So this is E for this. E is radius for radius. This is the E part. Again, ulna, I have clicked on D. So this, if your bone, this ulnar bone resembles this ulnar bone, you can click on D, and the description of all these bones are given on the right side. So it's very easy to calculate in by this format. So each time you select a bone, you press on plus, then you go to the next bone. Like this, all these 13 bones are valid. That is, which are these 13 bones? Radius, ulna, the first metacarpal, first, third, and fifth metacarpal, the epiphysis, then second metacarpal of the third and fifth phalanges, and distal phalanges of the first, third, and fifth phalanges. So these are the 13 centers which are taken. So generally 1, 3, and 5 are taken, and the second middle phalanx of the third and fifth fingers. We don't take the carpal bones for assessment of this Tanner-Whitehouse method. Although it is given in that, we don't generally take it. So once you select these 13 bones, you can, each time you press on plus, and finally you press on this calculate button. Then you will get something like this, how to assess that. So here I have selected everything as E, radius E. So depending on that, sometimes if it is H, you can do that, or if it is lesser maturity, you can press on D. Like that. So here finally you can get the TW2 RAS bones score as TW2 and as well as TW3 are given. So we generally take the TW3 score, that is 6.2 years. So it's very useful to use this app. Only thing is that it's a little bit time consuming. It is accurate and less observer bias. If you use the Greulichen pile charts or the another method which I am going to tell, that is the Gilson's and Ratib chart. So this is just freely available in the Play Store. This is another atlas which is easily we can download onto your mobile. Again, it resembles Greulichen pile chart. So generally we use this Gilson's and Ratib chart. Is very near the Greulichen pile method. Again, up to 18 years, the different bone ages are given. There you can compare with the standard your child's X-ray and calculate the bone age. But this method is a bit can have plus or minus 1 to 1.5 years, depending on the observer. Variability can be there. So better method is the TW3 method. It's accurate and less observer bias. And it is, only thing is that it's a time consuming. It cannot be used in a busy OPD. Suppose you have so many patients, it's sometimes it may be difficult to use because it may take some time, minimum at least 5 minutes for calculating the bone age. So mainly it's used for research purposes, but with this app, I think we can calculate faster. Then we have something like a bone expert, computer aided bone method. So this it's a many private hospitals, they can buy this application and install in the computer. Then just you have to upload the X-ray and you will get the bone age. This is the bone expert. So these are the first line investigations we would like to do, and depending on that, if all the first line investigations appear normal to you and mildly delay and you have ruled out all the systemic conditions, then you should still the cause of short stature is still not clear. Bone age is around 2 to 3 years. You are not very sure that what may be the cause. You go on to the second line of investigation. They are 8-AM cortisol. That why do we want to 8-AM cortisol? Because before doing a growth hormone stimulation test, this is a must. So that has to be taken. And in all girls with unexplained short stature, no systemic illnesses, unexplained short stature, you should do a karyotype. Then conditions like renal tubular acidosis, maybe the manifestations will be very subtle. So it's important that you investigate for this by doing a VBG, urine pH, etc., fractional exclusion of bicarb, everything in the second line of investigation. Then celiac serology, if you're strongly suspecting the child is severe, has anemia, short stature, unexplained short stature, sometimes GI symptoms may or may not be there. Again, if there is a high likelihood, if you're strongly thinking of celiac disease, it's better to do a celiac screen also at this time. So an IgA and a TTG should be taken along with a total IgA. Why you want to do a total IgA? Because there may be individuals with IgA deficiency. So you may actually miss these children if you don't take a total IgA. This level appear very low. So a celiac serology is a must if you're strongly suspecting celiac disease, and followed by a growth hormone stimulation. If at the end of all these things still you are not sure of what is the cause, and the child has a classical. So when do you do a growth hormone stimulation test? The child has fits into all the oxological criteria. The child has a severe short stature, usually less than the first centile, not the third centile, but even less than the first centile, poor growth, and clinical features which are suggestive of short statures, like the child has a prominent facies, like doll-like facies with a mid-facial hyperplasia, a proportionate short stature, and all screening investigations are normal, and a delayed bone age. You have to use your clinical sense so as to decide which children you should do a growth hormone stimulation. So clinical examination as well as in basic investigation you should do before a growth hormone stimulation test. You should remember is that random estimation of growth hormones are not useful. So many of the patients may come with a growth hormone level of 0.5, 0.1 like that. So it may be a random growth hormone. Because why random growth hormone is not useful? All of us know that growth hormone is secreted in a pulsatile fashion, and it has a lot of diurnal variation, and it's mainly secreted during the night. So if you take just a random, and growth hormone again has a T-half of only 20 minutes. So you may not, during the secretion, you may not be getting that peak. So that is why if you do a random growth hormone, it may not be useful, and you are likely to overestimate growth hormone deficiency. So always a provocative stimulation test should be taken for diagnosis of growth hormone. So a baseline growth hormone sample is taken, and whichever drug which you are using for provocative test should be given, and samples of growth hormone should be taken at every half hourly, that is 30, 60, 90, and 120 minutes. So at least you can even skip the 120 minutes, because a minimum of 4 values are enough. Like you can take a baseline sample, 30, 60, and 90 are good enough, because peak, once you give the drug, usually the peak occurs by 60 to 90 minutes. So you can even skip them, because it's a costly test. Any value, if you get any stimulated value more than 7 nanogram per ml by the newer assays, this rules out growth hormone deficiency. So if you get any value above 7, you can comfortably rule out growth hormone deficiency. There are some prerequisites for growth hormone stimulation tests. So the 8 AM cortisol should be normal, as I mentioned, because, and TFT should be normal, because if there is a deficiency of these two hormones, you can get a falsely low growth hormone levels. That's why if there is a deficiency of cortisol or a thyroid deficiency, these should be supplemented at least for 1 or 2 weeks before you do a growth hormone stimulation. And in peripubertal children, you have to give a sex steroid priming. Why do you want to give a sex steroid priming? Because as we all know, sex steroids increase the growth hormone secretion. So if the child has not entered into puberty, there may be false, even after stimulation, the growth hormone levels may not rise as expected. So you may be over-diagnosing CGDPs and all, you may be over-diagnosing as having a growth hormone deficiency. So who needs priming? Boys more than 11 years and girls more than 10 years, like peripubertal children, should do a priming. So although this is controversial nowadays, like it's always, I think that there are a lot of controversies about this sex steroid priming, but I think most general consensus is that we should go ahead with the sex steroid priming. Boys more than 11 years, injection testosterone 50 to 100 milligram is given IM 7 days prior to the test, and girls more than 10 years, estradiol valproate tablet 2 mg should be given once a day for 2 days prior to the test. And during the test, the child should be fasting eater. So the child has to be kept NPO from 10 or 11 in the night, and in the morning, the drug for stimulation is given. So what are the commonly done growth hormone stimulation tests? They are the clonidine stimulation test, glucagon stimulation test, and insulin tolerance test. So insulin test is not, even in adults, the insulin tolerance test is not done because of the risk of severe hyperglycemia. It should be avoided in children. In children, what we follow is the clonidine stimulation test. Glucagon, again, is a very costly drug, not easily available. So again, clonidine stimulation test is the one which we do. And how do we give that? After overnight fasting, the child is given 0.15 milligram per meter squared of clonidine is given oral, And all of you know that the tablet is around 100 microgram or 0.1 mg. And so a baseline sample is taken, the tablet is then given, and a cannula is put in place so that if the child goes into hypertension, we can give fluids during the test. Then samples are collected every 30 minutes, 30, 60, and 90, and 120. 120 can be skipped if required. And so a minimum of four samples should be collected. And it's important that the child's blood pressure should be checked and sugars should be checked during this test every half an hour, because especially smaller children, younger children are likely to go in for this hypertension and hypoglycemia as well. So it's important that we check them meticulously during and a few hours after the test also. So stimulated GH values less than 7 nanogram per deciliter are diagnostic of growth hormone deficiency, and values less than 3 indicate that the child has a severe growth hormone deficiency. Any single value more than 7, as I mentioned previously, rules out growth hormone deficiency. Even if it is a single value, it shows that the child is adequately responding to the various stimulations or stresses, and there is that can be growth hormone deficiency can be comfortably ruled out. And generally, a single growth hormone test is enough. If you read the books, they say that sometimes 2 tests are required, but in generally, most of the endocrinologists just do a single test along with the oxological parameters and other supporting tests. We can very easily make a diagnosis of growth hormone deficiency. So once you have diagnosed the child has low growth hormone levels on stimulation, you have to go in for the third line of investigations. MRI brain, especially MRI of the hypothalamo-pituitary area, is a must for all children diagnosed with growth hormone deficiency. So this should be done, especially sometimes there can be growth hormone deficiency. Generally, most of them present to us by around 3 to 4 years of age. So first 2 years is mostly nutritional. So generally they don't come to us in the first 2 years. Then after that, they come to us. So generally 4 to 7 years is what they generally come. But can get a secondary growth hormone deficiency, especially in children with intracranial tumors like craniopharyngioma or any other tumors, post-op radiation and things like that. So in all these conditions also, sometimes there could be an unrecognized pituitary tumor or a craniopharyngioma must be sitting there. So a child who is growing normally till 7 or 8 years, after that child falters in growth. So there it's very, when you have diagnosed a growth hormone deficiency, it's very important to rule out a treatable intracranial pathologies. Then other investigations like insulin like growth factor 1 levels can be done. It should be done as a supporting the growth hormone. Why do you want to do IGF-1 levels? Because growth hormone increases the production of IGF-1 from the liver by and the IGF-1 has receptors all around the body which are responsible for the growth action of it has a growth promoting effects. So the levels of IGF-1 is directly related to the growth hormone levels. That is why it is suggestive of growth hormone level. Growth hormone low levels are suggestive of growth hormone levels deficiency. In IGF-BP3 is a principal binding protein of IGF-1. So that is why it is in children less than 3 years, IGF-BP3 also should be taken. So above 3, IGF-1 levels are useful only above 3 years of age, because in smaller children and children with malnutrition and all, IGF-1 levels can be low. So in smaller children, if you want, you can do the IGF-BP3 levels also. IGF-1 ഈ രണ്ട് ടെസ്റ്റിനും വില കൂടുതലാണ്, പക്ഷെ വില കൂടുതലായതുകൊണ്ട് നല്ല ടെസ്റ്റ് ആണെന്ന് അതിന് അർത്ഥമില്ല. അപ്പം ഗ്രോത്ത് ഹോർമോൺ സ്റ്റിമുലേഷൻ ടെസ്റ്റ് തന്നെയാണ് നമുക്ക് ചെയ്യേണ്ട ടെസ്റ്റുകൾ. ഇത് ജസ്റ്റ് സപ്പോർട്ടിങ് മാത്രമേ ഉള്ളൂ. ഇത് ലോ ആണെങ്കിൽ ഇറ്റ് ഡസന്റ് ഷോ എനിത്തിങ്, just has a supporting evidence that the child has a growth hormone deficiency. So this test sometimes will help us to monitor the treatment. That is the only use of this. And just initially for just baseline IGF-1 levels, you can do for diagnosis growth hormone deficiency. Then genetic studies in some conditions they are done, but it's not a must to diagnose this condition. As I mentioned, IGF-1 is used for diagnosing growth hormone deficiency, monitoring treatment, and assessing the compliance. Sometimes patient may not be taking adequately, so the levels should be usually within plus or minus 2 standard deviation. So it varies with age, nutrition status, and even chronic diseases, undernutrition it can be low. So low in infancy and less reliable. And it's always better to take a fasting sample in the morning. although there is not much diurnal variation is there, is less reliable, less than 3 years. So these are IGFs once. So once you get the IGF values, you should see whether it is within the minus or plus 2 standard deviation. If it's less than minus 2 standard deviation, it supports our diagnosis. Similar for IGF BP3 levels also. So less than 3 years, this is more useful. But in our country, IGF BP3 levels are not very much standardized. So it's not that sensitive. So again, there's a problem. We have to use all other oxological and other supporting criteria for diagnosis of this condition. This is the normal imaging of the pituitary. MRI is a must for all children. You can see that this is a normal pituitary, anterior and posterior pituitary bright spot you can see. And you can see the stalk, infundibulum. This is the normal pituitary. Sometimes in children with panhypopituitarism, you can get abnormalities like a small anterior pituitary. Here you can see the pituitary is very, very small, just like a dot. And the infundibulum is not well seen. And the posterior pituitary is sitting above the infundibulum. So this is known as pituitary stalk interruption sequence. So sometimes this may be a clue to the condition. And any epidiameter of the pituitary, generally in children less than 12 years, it's around 6. And anteroposterior diameter less than 3 millimeters indicates that there is a hyperpituitarism. But remember that you can get a normal MRI also in children. Sometimes you can get an enlarged pituitary also in children with growth hormone. So that if it is normal also, still it doesn't rule out growth hormone deficiency. This is another child with an isolated growth hormone. Again, very small pituitary is there. Then sometimes you can get empty cell. The pituitary is compressed in the form of a sickle, and you can see the CSF over that. So this is an empty cellular syndrome. This is a MRI picture of a child with craniopharyngitis. You can see the cyst-like condition here. Here also you can see. So this child actually presented with growth failure and other multiple problems. How do you diagnose growth hormone deficiency in newborns? In newborns, generally they have a very high levels of growth hormones, generally. In children with GHD, can have recurrent hypoglycemias, prolonged jaundice, and sometimes midline defects. Like this may conditions like a cleft lip, micropenis, and in an older child, a single central incisor may give a clue to the presence of a growth hormone deficiency or a multiple pituitary hormone deficiency. Other pituitary hormones may be deficient. So in a newborn, how do you diagnose growth hormone deficiency? So in a newborn, a random growth hormone less than 7 nanogram per ml in the first week or during hypoglycemia, if the growth hormone levels are less than 20 nanogram per ml, it is suggestive of growth hormone deficiency. Or in a standard, in an older child, peak levels of less than 7 nanogram per ml on a standard provocative test by clonidine by newer monoclonal assays indicates that there is a growth hormone deficiency, or it can be sometimes genetically proven, or these are again supportive criteria. IGF-1 and IGF-BP3, all these are supportive criteria. Clinical as well as carefully performed investigation will help us to diagnose this. So the key points here are systemic diseases and malnutrition should be ruled out in all cases of short stature, and estimation of the bone age has a key role. Random growth hormone levels do not have any value in the diagnosis of growth hormone deficiency, and it should be estimated by a growth hormone stimulation test, which is carefully performed. And investigation for supporting the diagnosis also is required. Clinical examination as well as other supporting investigations are required to diagnose this condition. Thank you.